Welcome back to A Plus Parents, everyone. And guys, first of all, I have a super exciting guest today. I'm so excited. And I'm going to say her name, and hopefully I get this right, but she did help me pronounce her last name. It's Emmy, here's her first name, Emmmy, and then Sobieski. So I've been practicing a little bit here so I can say her name correctly. I want to tell you guys about Emmy. So, and by the way, if parents and you're listening, this is going to be something for young people to tune into because it's going to impact them today so that they can look at their future. But I want to tell you a little bit about Emmy. So Emmy is an entrepreneur, but she's also a world-class athlete and multiple degrees. So just kind of take you through this. I just want you to know we're with somebody like Olympic star status. Here we go, right? So first of all, Emmy's a CFA, and I'm going to have her tell us what that means. She's the author of, are you ready? Not $1 million careers. No, she's the author of $100 million careers. So I'm going to tell you how to get to her site, how to find out about her book. She's currently the COO and co-founder of a new startup company called Competitive Storytelling. And, the companies that she's worked with, she's really out to make a difference, really to be there to bring some world-class ideas to, have people change their world and when people change their world, what else happens is we change the world. So just super exciting to see all that. Emmy told me a little bit about a company that she used to work with, and she co-managed. This is a #1 ranked company. It's called Nicholas Applegate Global Technology. It's a fund, and she was working with them in 1998 and in 1999. That company itself grew a stock portfolio up 495%. That's just incredible. She has institutional investing experience for over 25 years. So if you're watching the video right now and you're going like, wait a minute, what did she start when she was like 4? Here we go, right? So, but so she has a wealth of experience. She works with students now, and she does mentoring. And not only that, but she works with people from diverse backgrounds. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of the different kinds of people she's worked with, and literally taking people that have maybe just in their college years, but taking them by the time they're in those college years to the time they're 30 to be worth millions of dollars. And, I asked her a question as we were getting ready to start. It's funny when we think about the idea of $100 million for a lot of people, it's like, well, how do I even get to $1 million, right? And so she's going to have a great answer to that question, because I know you're probably thinking that as well, right? So her book, $100 Million Careers, which is the $100M careers, super easy to get to. And we're going to give you all the info in the show notes as well. It's really looking at mentoring any person of any age that is interested in finance or interested in their own startup company. So are you ready? Here we go. She has her bachelor's degree is in economics from the University of California in San Diego, California. And then she has her MBA, or master's of business administration from USC, which is University of Southern California. And hopefully there wasn't any competition of football time, that kind of thing in sports. But since we're talking about sports, right? Emmy also has athletic accomplishments during her 25 years while she's an institutional investor. She also, and we're going to have her talk about dressage, so you can tell us a little more about that is. But she placed in 2005, 9th place in the U.S. trials for the in the world, right? So she also in 2017 she was the Masters Championship in the 100-meter and 400-meter dash in the 50 to 55-year-old division. So, and then in 2017, the North American champion overall. So she's a bodybuilder. She's into dressage, which has to do with horse riding, which I don't know a whole lot about, so I'm going to have her share that with us. But then also track and field. So, yeah. Oh, and she does something. This is a new one for me too. So Emmy runs marathons. So you probably are thinking, oh my gosh, marathons, right? But she also does something called ultra marathons. So I'm going to have her share about that as well. So first, Emmy, oh my gosh, what a wealth of experience you have, everything from the business world to being an athlete and just and being a mentor and a champion for people. So first of all, welcome to the podcast. And if there's anything I left out, let us know. And thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, and thanks for a beautiful introduction, Dennis.
Yeah, my pleasure. Okay, let's start with some of your with your athletic background because I think that's really cool. And in what's interesting to me about that, because you shared with me a little bit about somebody that you met that won a gold medal at the Olympics, and I'd like you to share that story again. But one of the things about being somebody who can reach that championship level and to be at the U.S. national team level the way that you have, that in itself, that requires a level of goal setting and, that kind of like what it takes to produce that kind of result. But let's kind of walk through. Tell us a little bit about being in dressage, because I know I say the word, and that's kind of like me telling somebody in the computer world, some computer word, when I don't really know what it means, right? So, so share with us a little bit about your background and how you got into that and what it is.
Oh, absolutely. So dressage is the French word for training. So it literally means training in French. And the idea was that horses were used for war. And so, you've got all of your infantry. I mean, this is before tanks, right? Horses were what you'd use to go fight a war if you were in Europe. And imagine that, like people, we each have our own love languages. We each have our own way of communicating. Imagine if each of you kind of train your horse so that you guys get each other. And then you're out on the battlefield and the horse dies. And now you get on another horse. Well, he's trained in the love language of somebody else. And so you say, go right, and he goes left, and you're going to get killed. And so centuries ago, these armies came up with systems to train the horses so that, just like a car, if you did a certain aid, it would go left, or a certain aid and it would go right, so that if your horse dies and you get another horse, it's not so dangerous. It'll respond to the same aids. Once all of the tanks, etc., took over, so they would have competitions as well, going all the way up the levels, and it was all called military, and they had military jumping competitions and military dressage, which is the training, the flat work competitions, throughout Europe. And so the Europeans are the best at it. And once the war, all the need for these horses in wars kind of dissipated after World War I, when you had tanks coming in, it became much more of a sport of royals and a sport of kind of showing off who's the best at it and who's the best horse trainer. And the horses became far more elegant, far more showy, because it was more of a spectator sport. And anyway, so that's the background of dressage. It's really fun to just feel like you're one with the horse, and you give invisible aids, and the horse is dancing. The horses do pirouettes like in ballet, where
Wow.
you imagine a horse galloping across a range. We can have them gallop in place and then do 8 strides to complete a complete circle on their hind legs, just like a ballerina doing a pirouette. But imagine getting a horse that weighs 10 times what you weigh to make his neck in a perfect arch and kind of canter around. So that's the kind of things that we do. Now, the thing that I will share is, when I had trainers and where you're moving up the levels and you're doing this, yes, you need goals, but you also need to understand that you're a winner and you deserve to win. And what I would do for years and years is I would do a fantastic routine in the competition arena. And the last movement or 2 movements, I would just make small mistakes so that I would end up in second place instead of first place. And I finally had this champion for me, who was my trainer when I moved to New York and was working at hedge funds in New York. And there was something with him. He believed in me so much. And he really told me, why not you? You deserve to win. Why not you? To the point where I took that winning ride and I took it all the way through. And there's something I've learned I was a coach for speaking as well. And you see it in horse rounds, you see it in speaking. There's a moment where you finish your routine. And after you finish your routine, your brain naturally starts doing a critique, positive or negative. You do a review of your routine. And often that review starts before you finish your routine, which will also make you make a little mistake at the end. And the trick that I learned was, imagine you have one more thing to do. So at the end of a dressage competition, you go up the center line and you salute to the judge. I would imagine that not only the salute to the judge counts, but the walk out of the arena counts. That way, I wouldn't be finishing in my mind and starting to critique too early. I would be able to keep that same momentum with the horse.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. Wow. You can apply that in just about everything, right? Of like knowing that you're doing
Absolutely.
something. Yeah. And then just
Imagine you have one
couple
more
extra little
thing to
things.
do.
Right.
Have one
Oh, that's
more thing
so
to do so
great.
you don't mess up your last move. Absolutely.
Wow. Okay. So I think when I was introducing you, I'm not sure I got this all correct. So in 2005, you were ninth place in the U.S. trials for the World Cup team. What is that? What was that? What is that?
So I believe it was 25, 30 years ago. They so dressage, and as I talked about it got more and more of a spectator sport. And so they had something called a freestyle, and a freestyle is the same as you would see if you were watching skating, where ice skating, where they can have you have some moves, different moves count for different points. You choose your own music and you can do them in a certain order. And so you do that with dressage as well. And that's much more interesting for the spectator to watch than 50 tests that are all the same pattern.
Right.
So they came up with this idea, and we have the World Championships every 4 years. You have the Olympics every 4 years. So, but why not have something called the World Cup, where it's all focused on that freestyle? So you do your first competition is the routine that everybody does, and your placing in that just determines when you're going to go. You're going to get a better go time in the freestyle. So you do both competitions, and that's the World Cup. So that's what and the funny thing was, I have zero musical ear. But I wanted to compete at the Olympic level. So I was competing at the Olympic level, which in dressage is called Grand Prix. And so when I'm at the Olympic level, I'm doing the same tests as everybody and the same competitions as people that are trying out for the Olympics or Pan Am Games. So I would enter all the trials, because why not? So I entered the Pan Am Game trials, the World Equestrian Game trials, which is like the World Championships, the Olympic trials. And so as soon as I had a freestyle, then every year I entered the World Cup trials. And this goes back to this competitive thing that young people can learn about, again, because my coach was always telling me what like he coached me, okay, do this, do that. And there's a little resistance in me that I think, well, I'm on the horse, I know a little bit better. The weekend that I qualified for the World Cup trials, which is all about your freestyle score, which is to music, which I'm terrible at. But the weekend that I qualified, I had 104 fever, but it was internationally, it was, US Olympic internationally recognized competition. So they drug test you and you can't take any. So I couldn't take any NyQuil. I couldn't take anything. And you can't scratch and say I'm not competing unless a doctor says you can get out. So I had 104 fever and they wouldn't let me out of it. And so
Wow.
I'm sitting, and it was something like 95 or 90 degrees out in Florida with the humidity, and then I've got a wool coat on and full leather boots and a leather inseam. I mean, I was just hot and miserable, 104 fever, and I'm on my horse and my trainer's telling me what to do. And I tell you, there was no resistance. I was just like, just get me through this. I'm doing everything you say, just like a robot. Highest score I'd ever received. So again, there's this resistance, right? If you can get rid of this resistance, the amount that you can achieve is so much more than any of us believe. It's like when they put you under anesthesia, you can stretch far more than you can when you're awake. It's all of these resistances that are in our body that you can just get rid of. Anyway, so I go to the freestyle, but I have no musical timing, and the freestyle music is set so that you're going to do this beautiful pirouette with your horse, but the music's going to go ba 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 bum exactly in time with the. And I had to have the lady that made that freestyle music for me say, and now the pirouette, and I had to listen to it over and over. But I just thought it was so funny because I was so bad at music, and somehow I didn't end up in the top. You have to end up in the top 12 in the United States to qualify for the competition to make the team. I didn't end up in the top 12 for the Olympics, which was far more of these rote tests. Didn't do it for the Pan Am Games, didn't do it for the World Championships, but I did it for the one in the freestyle, which is something that I'm the weakest at. So anyway, I just thought it was hilarious. But the whole thing happened because I was just so sick that weekend. I couldn't resist, and I did exactly what my trainer said.
Wow. That, what a great story too, because it's funny. Sometimes I think coaches what we say are great coaches. Sometimes what makes them great coaches is because we let them coach us. And we don't put a lot of those things. Well, I think I might do this or do that, right? We actually just say, okay, I'm just totally surrendering to this, and you're the coach. Let's go, right? So how funny, but it took 104 fever and in the heat of Florida to make that happen.
I got a lot of my own opinions about stuff, Dennis.
I
Clearly.
Well, that's okay. Well, we all do, right? We all
Clearly.
do. Okay, so you're also somebody that does the 100-meter dash, right? The 400-meter dash. And you do marathons and ultra marathons. And typically when people that do track and field and run, they usually specialize in long distance running or the sprinting, but you've done all of that. The first thing is, what's the difference between a marathon and an ultra marathon? Let's start there.
So an ultra, yes. So an ultra marathon is anything longer than a marathon.
Okay.
So usually it starts with a 50K, which is about 31 miles, 31 and a half miles. So by the time you've done a marathon at 26 miles, your legs are already kind of numb. Rounding it up by another 6 miles, 5.5, 6 miles, it really doesn't make a difference. And often you're doing the ultras, they're on trails. So it's actually easier than the marathon, which is on street. So I find a 31-mile ultra on trails is easier on my body. It's less, I don't feel as worn out as I do with a 26-mile road run. But then ultra marathons can be 50 miles. So 50K is at 31 and a half miles, 50 miles, 72 miles. There's one that goes across the tip of Africa, that from the Atlantic Ocean to the Indian Ocean, that's 72 miles. Then there's, then they have 100-milers, 200-milers. They have, they have 24-hour runs where how far can you run in 24 hours? It's unlimited. They have all kinds of opportunities. There's a fantastic book, 50 Marathons in 50 Days by Dean Karnassus. It's just a terrific, and it really tours you through the United States. He did 50 marathons, 50 days, 50 states.
Wow.
Anyway, so that's ultra. And the funny thing is, I have been so blessed to maintain this curiosity that I had as a kid. I was always like, why? My parents said something, well, why? And then they give me the answer, well, why? Right. And that's why I became an analyst, because I could do that for a living, get paid to ask why all the time. And so that same curiosity led me to all these sports. I got stressed out from my marriage, and I started running, and I would jog a couple miles, and a few years later it's half marathons and then marathons, and then why not do an ultra? And I thought, well, when I turn 50, I think it would be cool as a 50th birthday party, birthday present to myself, to do a 50K. So that's why I did ultra marathons. Nothing, then I was having a really fun spring. My stepdaughter wanted to go to Hawaii. There was a Hawaii marathon there, but my girlfriend was turning 50 the year after me. She wanted to do a 50K. They were 5 days apart. I thought, well, I'll see if I can maintain that high level for the 5 days in between and do a 50K followed by a marathon in the space of 5 days. I love the experimentation with the body. So then that went really well. And I thought, I think I'm going to do a spring kind of ultra marathon at altitude. And so then I found one in Yosemite, and I found one in Jackson Hole, and I just found all these ones that are high altitude, Big Bear, and I scheduled that for the spring. So a couple of months of these ultra marathons all kind of grouped together. Well, at the age of 51, which was what age I was when I did it, you have to stay pretty on top of your training. And so every Tuesday I had sprints, Monday, Thursday, hills, long runs, so the kind of thing, but very regimented otherwise you can get injured. And my Tuesday sprints, all of a sudden they start going really fast. And, and it's 20, 22 seconds for 100 meters. And I'm thinking, and of course, that's not stopping at blocks, right? I already was kind of jogging and then I took off, but I thought, well, I'm not going to get any faster. So I thought, well, are there any local, races I could go to? Maybe I go do some track and field right now because my sprints are going great, and I could schedule the track and field for after all my ultras. You don't want to do them at the same time because they're the opposite type of thing. But I thought, okay, I'll finish this spring of ultras, and then maybe in June I can do some kind of a track and field thing, and I'll have 5-6 weeks to train for that and get specialized. And I look, and the US Masters Championship is coming to San Diego that June, like June 20th. I thought, well, that's just perfect. And at the age of, between 50 and 55, there's so few women doing track and field running off blocks at that age that you don't even have to qualify. You just sign up. So I thought, well, that's great. And like pulling a string like a cat, I'm like, well, I wonder what else they have on the, I wonder what else they have to offer since I'm going anyway. I mean, it's only 4 miles from my house. So it's not a big effort at the time because I was living in San Diego at the time. So I look and they have bodybuilding. And I thought, well, it's kind of, I never done bodybuilding, never even considered it, but I thought I've been doing weightlifting with a trainer to support my ultra marathons. So I thought, well, it's kind of an 85% overlap of getting your muscles, your muscles in sprint. You want your quads to be big and explosive, and in bodybuilding, you just want big muscles. So, there's like 85% overlap. And I thought, yeah, why not? And I called up the organizer and said, well, what should I, should I enter, what is this bikini? There's figure, physique, there's open, there's amateur. And he said, well, you've never been any of them, so you could just enter whatever you want. I thought, well, I don't know the difference. It's not like 6 weeks from now I'm going to be great at any of them. So I entered them all. And this is a great lesson in showing up, because the number 4, this was a kind of a secondary organizer group for bodybuilding. So, they weren't going to have like a ton of people, ton of competitors coming. They're much more known for snatch and grab and physical competitions than the kind of bikini prancing around thing. But I show up, and number 4 in the world shows up for figure. Bikini was a mixed bag. And no one shows up for physique, for women's physique. And so I won the North American champion for women overall of all ages for AAU bodybuilding for 2017 at the age of 51 by just showing up.
Wow. That's really amazing. I mean, it's really amazing. So, again, you mentioned a trainer. I say there really is something about having that, having that coach, that trainer, that person there, that one that's there to guide you. Quick question for you: do you, when in your running, do you have a preference between the sprinting and the long distance, or
For
do
sure.
you like it all? But which is your thing?
I find the long distance is very meditative. I like it. The track and field was one and done, but it was just why not? Because my times were getting fast, and I thought it would be great. Now, my problem was that it was all the same weekend. And so
Okay.
the thing I didn't think about, yes, the training for the two things were, 85% overlap, but that was good. And I got a high school coach that coached top athletes for sprint, and he helped me run off blocks, etc. I had a pose coach for the bodybuilding. I had a gym trainer for the muscles. I mean, I kind of got who I needed to tell me how to do things. But what I didn't think about was that on Saturday, I was in so many of I entered every single bodybuilding. I entered open, I entered adult, amateur, everything in all three divisions. And then, there's age group, there's non-age group, there was USA Masters Championship, there was, so I was in like, I don't know, 20 or 30 of these things. And every time I go out on stage, you got to walk out on stage and you got to flex your quads and you got to flex your glutes and you got to really, go through the poses. And I was doing that for 4 hours during the day. And then they had an evening performance where the crowds come. That during the day, they actually do the judging. They decide who's going to be where. Then you come out and you do the same thing for the crowds at night. And so the next day I went to run these sprints and I was like on flat tires. So
Wow.
that, I just had been doing so much flexing with my legs all day the day before,
Right.
probably 6-8 hours of flexing my legs. And so that was a little disappointing. But again, it's about showing up. There was one woman in my division. So she won
Right.
gold, I won silver.
Oh, nice. That's awesome. So it's just, it's just amazing. It's like, you're like, you know what, let's just go. I love that. So I want to bring this back to your book, because I feel like some of the things you just shared about are completely in the same spirit of your book and how your book is created and who it's for. And something that, and just kind of see if that, see if this is, if it's kind of the right fit, but noticing the overlap that you had between when you train for a marathon and training for sprinting, where you're actually having both. A lot of times we hear the number $100 million, and that's just, for a lot of people, it's unreachable. It's like, it doesn't even like to even see what that looks like or how it is, or say it's not tangible. It kind of lives in a world that is hard to imagine. So, but that overlap, I'm going to take a guess that the overlap exists between whether you're trying to make $100,000, $1 million, $10 million, or the $100 million. And, when we first started talking, as we were getting ready to start the recording, you were looking at it like, well, why wouldn't you go for the $100 million? Why stop at the 100,000 or the million or the 5 million, 10 million, whatever it is? But I think it has to do with that same overlap, that you're doing the same kinds of things. So why not have it be amazing, right? Kind of like the way the training was for the running. So am I kind of on target there?
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, that's cool. So for our listeners, right, if you're thinking about the 100,000, keep thinking that, and it's totally great. But we're going to jump to the 100 million, and we're going to look from there so that everything you can hear in making $100 million applies to wherever you are in your life and whatever you're up to. And then we'll go right into that. So let's see. So let's just look like our listeners, right? Because when they hear $100 million, like they're like, well, how do I do that? So how can people make $100 million?
Well, the way I say, it's a 3-step process. And before I even say that 3-step process, the biggest chapter in my entire book, chapter 2, is all about having a foundation of health, mental health, physical health. So it's moving, nutrition, and connection with other people. And when people say, what is the top tip for making $100 million? I say, having that strong foundation. So that's something anybody can do in any walk of life. Move, eat whole foods, and connect with other people. Then you can do those things better. You can optimize, but that's the big that's your foundation. And then
Gotcha.
it's a 3-step process that you can apply all the time. Break in, get equity, break out. So you got to break into these industries where it's possible to make 100 million. And I cover 5 in finance, but they're also in entertainment. They're also in entrepreneurial. I cover one of the ones I cover is creating a startup. So that's really break in. Getting equity could be getting equity in a startup. It could be getting the opportunity to manage your own fund within a larger fund corporate company. So getting equity, getting participation. So you're not just getting your salary, you have something that earns while you sleep. And then you build up equity in yourself, in other clients, knowing who you are. And then break out, you have your own firm, or within that firm, you take far more ownership. And then once you have your own firm, then you can make your 100 million. And so those are the steps to do that. And that obviously can apply to 100,000. Now, here's what I would say about thinking about making 100,000. When JFK did his famous speech about we're sending men to the moon, we did not have the technology to send men to the moon then. So he's saying we're going to send men to the moon, and we had no possible way to send men to the moon. By the time, and he gave a deadline, and we made that deadline. By the time we sent men to the moon, we had just experienced the highest density of technological innovation that had ever been created in the United States. So many things got invented in the process of needing to get men to the moon. And this is exactly the same thing that you need to do with your career. You've got to moonshot your career. And we were talking earlier about this example of the person with the double Olympic gold. Too many people set their goals too small. And then you overachieve them, and then you're kind of, I mean, it's fine, but if you moonshot your career, if you say I'm going for 100 million, it makes it actually easier to get to 100,000, easier to get to 1 million, and easier to keep your momentum up. And you can have milestones along the way. So it's not that every day you're frustrated because you're not worth 100 million yet. You can have milestones that you celebrate along the way. But the bigger that you have that end goal, the less likely you are to kind of roll over, give up, lose momentum.
Wow. It was like, and you were sharing about the person with the 2 gold medals, and it was like, that's all they were up to. And they're like, I mean, that was it, right? And they achieved that. And then they're like, well, what do I do now? It's like, now I'm done. Right? It's kind of like,
and she was sad. She was depressed.
Yeah.
And
wow.
she had, and so this story, this is Ankie van Grunsven, and she was from Holland. And Germany, as I spoke about dressage before, it's all of the training of war horses. And Germany is, of course, the most, at the time, in the kind of, if you think about the last 2 centuries, the most aggressive war machine that there was. And so Germany had the best dressage teams, the best dressage horses, the best training, the best breeding. They had the best programs. So they had won every Olympics since 1956 in terms of the team medals and most of the individual golds. So out comes Ankie van Grunsven from Holland, and she gets this great horse. And this horse helps her lead herself plus the Dutch team to the Olympic team gold and individual gold. And then she did that 2 Olympics in a row, which is hard to do with horses because they age kind of more like dogs, right? Faster. So it's hard to stay at that top. And so that was her goal, to get 2 Olympic golds. And I went to visit her right after she got that 2nd Olympic gold. And you would think, I mean, she has done the undoable. She's done the thing that you can't accomplish. Germany was dominant for decades, and all of a sudden she took it twice, the Olympic individual gold. And I went to visit her, and she was depressed. She wasn't excited. She wasn't on the top of the world. She's just said, Emmy, I don't know what I'm going to do next. I don't have any motivation. She's just kind of sitting in dark rooms, just not happy. And she had a little horse there, 5-year-old, real sparkle in his eye, and his name was Solinero. And he saved her because he had such talent that she was able to take him out and go and win a 3rd individual Olympic gold. And that's great, but it took so much effort. It takes so much more effort to create a new goal from scratch after being demotivated and depressed and having the letdown. It's kind of like eating sugar and then you have the crash. It's so hard to come back from the crash and get energized again. It's much easier to just have really audacious goals because we are so innovative. We're so skilled and talented as human beings. It's incredible what you can't even imagine all of your capacity and all of what you could achieve. So you've got to have those goals be way higher than you could imagine.
It's interesting to hear you say that because, you if you think about people that do programs on goal setting, and I do a program on goal setting, and I love goal setting. And, it's always interesting to me is I'll do a presentation and people are like, well, is that really realistic? Right. And that realistic, that's that limiting, that's what you're pointing to, that like, that's what limits you, because you think, well, what is realistic? But going beyond that, it's like, well, take that away. Like, what really could it be? Like, just let's stop. Let's not get into the thing about what's realistic and unrealistic. What would it look like if you achieve something that was, in this world of like $100 million,
and then double it.
Yeah, and then double it.
Whatever
Right?
you think, because I mean, Holland had never won the Olympic individual medal. So she probably thought it was a stretch goal to get to.
Right.
Right. So
Right.
Clearly it's just not even enough.
Yeah.
Now, again, if you say, if I don't achieve that, I'm going to feel like a failure, that's not going to work. You're going to have burnout. So you've got to have, in the goal setting, you've got to have achievable milestones that are along the way that you celebrate. So celebrate every single one, but have that moonshot, have that putting the man on the moon be something that you don't even have the materials. You don't have the technology. You have no idea how you would achieve it. It's got to be that far out.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Okay. So here we are, and we've set this huge goal, like $100 million. So given that you've worked with people and you've developed people and you've gotten people that have become that in their life, what would be the biggest mistakes that you could share with people that they make when they miss making that money?
So the biggest mistakes, two. One is when you're young, you've got to take a lot of risk. You don't want to get into a job where you're making $30,000 a year and you're going to get 8% raises every year and you have no downside risk. You want to get in there and get some equity, take some risks, take some big risks when you're young with your career, because the way that you get to the 100 million, the way that my mentees have is they created a company, they created a fund company. Like I said, break in, get equity, break out on your own. And they've done that before the age of 30, such that they've sold their company, or their company that they're running is spitting off enough cash that they're worth, say, 3 to 5 million by the age of 30. And then if you're 3 to 5 million, the second mistake. So the first mistake is not enough risk early on. Create your own company, get equity, get that done early. The second big mistake is taking the gas off. And that's a mistake that I made, that my two friends who have gotten to the 100 million, they did not make that mistake. I was working at a hedge fund and I was like, wow, this is amazing. I ran the #1 fund in the world, which then got me the job at a hedge fund. I'm working at the hedge fund. I'm making that first nest egg. And then from that nest egg of a couple million, that's what you need to take and compound that into 100 million. And that's what you've seen Mark Andreessen do. That's what you've seen a lot of these famous people, Elon Musk do. Elon Musk gets his payout from PayPal and invests it in Tesla and SpaceX. He doesn't just say, okay, I'm done. So Now, granted, he got more than 100 million just from PayPal, but that's how he got to be worth more than 100 billion, is to take that first nest egg. You got to get it early, and then you've got to figure out, okay, how am I going to compound that? By getting more equity on boards of directors, by running my own fund, by helping to fund my next startup. Keep that gas on.
Gotcha. It's so great too, because and you're mentioning things for me. It's just, I love words like compounding, right? Because I, as a math guy, right? Compound and the idea and the power of compounding and what it looks like. So, but a lot of it, it's so great because it is starting young, and I look at my own life, and I spent the first several years, 15 years as a public school teacher, right? Before I got into my own business and got into really being I took that risk. Like, what would it look like if I could write my own courses, and what would become possible possible. Well, that was, I was close to 50 years old when that happened, right? And, so and if I look at the last 10 to 15 years of my life, and it has just been on just fast-paced acceleration and just so many amazing things happening. And what would have looked like if I started doing that when I was 20? Instead of waiting a lot longer than that. So I love that, that people are really looking at that to get started now. It's like, I think oftentimes we think, well, I'm going to wait and I'm going to do this first and I'm going to get this and get this and get this. It's like you're saying, no, just jump in and go and take those risks. And, it's like, I think about teenagers today, and all the things that they're faced with as teenagers, and the world is a very, very different place than when I was a teenager, right? And I think just for them to get up in the morning, get out of bed is a risk, because there's so many things for them. It's challenging, when I look and see. So as we see that there, and you can see some of the, like, as you were, mentioning the mistakes that people can make, is keep the accelerator on, keep going and start now, start young. So what would you say is like that pathway then? Because you've kind of pointed to it. So when you're looking at that, like, as you say, that path to 100 million, and then as the path, how long would it take someone as they get going on that path?
Yeah. So there's a lot of paths to 100 million, it's a crazy thing to think. There are 25,000 US households that are worth more than 100 million that are self-made.
Wow.
So my goal is that the next 25,000 aren't just people that knew someone to guide them on the way, but that they can read a book and they can know these paths, they can know these secrets. And so I focused on 5 paths: venture capital, hedge funds, private equity, startups, and board directors. Those are just the ones that I know where I have friends. Obviously, you see entertainers that are worth, YouTubers worth more than 100 million. They're out there. But the ones that I know, and typically the path, the path that's going to give you the most at bats is to get into investment banking. So if you can push yourself to get the grades to get into an Ivy League, and you get into an Ivy League, and then you can get into a top 4 investment banks, then private equity grabs the top 3% out of those investment banks. But venture capital loves people that come out of investment banking. You learn modeling, you meet a lot of CEOs early, you understand about companies, you understand about how they work. So you could get a job in a startup by moving from investment banking over into investor relations, and then later the CFO of a startup. So there's a lot of paths from investment banking. Hedge funds hire out of investment banking. So that's a great one. The other path for students is management consulting. And you'll still, especially in the moving over into startups, or you can go management consulting and potentially move from there to some type of banking, which then you could kind of backdoor back into hedge funds. Not private equity. Private equity is pretty exclusive, and it's pretty much the path for the best private equity. That's the path. There's other paths that I mentioned, but those are the top 5. The interesting thing is, like we talked about compounding, I also like to look at these money flywheels. So if you go to the startup venture capital board director path, once your career's going in your mid-30s, you will very typically, as a venture capitalist, be on, because you get a board seat because you want control of the companies that you're invested in. So you're going to be on some boards, and you're going to learn about being on boards. And there's going to be other times where you meet a startup that you're just so passionate about, and maybe you take a leave of absence from your venture capital firm, or maybe you do both, and now you're a startup co-founder. And then you do really well in the startup, and a couple of your friends say, hey, let's make our own venture capital firm, very much like what Ben Horowitz and Mark Andreessen did. And they are both billionaires, and they are, they have Andreessen Horowitz as huge venture capital firm. And later you might be asked to be an independent director on a board because you're so well known, even, not with your venture capital. All of a sudden now you're getting so many at bats, you're getting exits from the startup, you're getting payouts from your venture capital business, and you're getting paid $1 million to 10 million just in stock options to, if you're a hot commodity, to join these boards. And to be on boards, you don't need to have that be a full-time job. You can be a CEO of another company while being on a board. You can be in venture capital. And so now you're having these chunks of money come in your, say, 30s and 40s, but especially in your 30s, where you get 2 million here, 5 million there, and then all of those can compound, and you don't have to compound at such a huge rate. You don't have to compound at 15% anymore. You can compound at 5% to make it to that 100 million.
That's awesome. And it's great because you're saying in your 30s and 40s, those things start happening, which backs you up to when you're in your 20s. And it's like, so you're building the momentum to get to that place when you're in your 30s and 40s, to get to that place that takes you to the next place when you get into your 50s and 60s. And I just
absolutely. Like basically that's that break in, get equity, break out. That happens ideally that happens in your 20s.
Right.
You break in from 22 to 25 and you learn the thing. And then hopefully 3 years in, they give you a portfolio, they give you control over a portfolio. 25 to 28, you get your 3-year track record running your portfolio. Maybe they give you a bigger one and you can either form your own fund or you can run a bigger fund, such that in your kind of 29 to 32, you are either running a huge fund within a large company like Citadel or something like that, where you're very well known, or you've broken out. And so you've either broken out, within a very large company, or you have your own you have your own fund or your own startup in your early 30s. And then you're starting to get on, you've shown that you can scale, you start to get on boards and everything like that much earlier. And the whole thing just, it works.
Wow, it's great. And when you're looking at talking from the investment banking world, and for lots of people, we have one of the things that I love about young people today, and one of the conversations that is now become, I don't know if popular is the right word, but it's much more a mainstream conversation, is that people are encouraging young people to be doing the things they love to do, and to develop their career out of what they love to do, not necessarily here's what you're supposed to do and then what you love to do is like your hobby, right? Was my generation, right? But really looking at what you love to do. And so it's kind of looking at that non-traditional kind of background kind of thing, that you can still do it in there, because you can still apply the same formula. You're breaking in, you're getting equity in whatever that looks like. And so managing a portfolio, well, the portfolio could be whatever kind of industry that you're working in, and then you're getting out and you're starting something that then gets bigger and it's on your own, and you're repeating the process again. So when you see like the non-traditional background, are you seeing that as well? Like when people find what's really, really passionate about, they can use this process in anything that they're up to in their life.
Absolutely. So one of my mentees, Greg Magadini, and he's happy to have me talk about him. But so he was in community college because he couldn't afford a 4-year college, and he was an amateur boxer, and he loved boxing and he loved risk. He loves risk. And then he read some article about concussions and the long-term impact about multiple concussions. And he thought, look, I love risk, but I don't want to have all these brain injuries and not be able to use my brain. And so he thought, I got to find something else. And he found stock options that had all of that excitement and risk without the concussions. And so he started trading, and then he went to some fairs with his community college and found some guy, actually of just a wealthy man, that wanted somebody to put together some option strategies for him. And he did that over the summer. By the time he came to UC San Diego for his second 2 years, so he did the second 2 years at a 4-year college, right? So his last 2 years, by the time he came there, was still excited about options, wanted to meet other people that were excited about options, and he formed the UCSD Options Trading Club. It didn't exist, so he just made it, right? You just make it if it doesn't exist. So he made that, and then he met the boss that ran the hedge fund, who had retired, and I wasn't working there any longer, but he lived nearby, so I had him come by to speak to the students. And Greg met him, and Greg said, when I graduate college, because I had each one of them say what their major was, tell our guests, what is your major and what are you going to do? And he said, I'm going to be an institutional trader. And Glenn said, oh, no, you're not. No one would ever hire an institutional trader straight out of college. And so once he left, I said, Greg, this is a great lesson for you. This guy, who's a complete billionaire, doesn't know, and you're going to prove him wrong. And
Wow.
Lo and behold, he got the internships he needed, and he was an institutional trader trading high frequency treasury bonds straight out of college.
Wow.
That company got bought by that trading company got bought by DRW, and he loved options. He didn't really love the institutional, the bond trading as much, but he was trading. He was doing what he wanted to do, right? So he bided his time. That company got bought by DRW. DRW was the winner in the Silk Road auction of Bitcoin when Bitcoin got seized by the government from the Silk Road. And they said to their employees, we're going to share this. Anybody want to buy some Bitcoin, just let us know. And Greg thought, yeah, that would be great. And then when he was in college, he actually co-authored a paper with a friend of his. So this is also like in my book, you don't know what networking is going to mean for you. And this is just, they just decided in an accounting class to do a paper together, and they came up with some topic, and then they were like, we're not that excited. And they thought, well, why not do it on Bitcoin? Sorry about that. So they said, well, why not do it on Bitcoin? So they did this thing on Bitcoin, and they were like, it's only used by criminals. There's no use, right? Like, we're not going to do it. And so they put it away. But then now he has this opportunity to buy Bitcoin. He buys Bitcoin. The person he co-wrote that paper with was also a mentee of mine. And by that time, she was an early employee at Coinbase. And so after he bought the Bitcoin went up a whole bunch because, they got seized, right? And then things get better. And so it's going up a bunch. And she said, there's this thing called Ethereum, and it had an ICO, an initial coin offering. And people are they're not understanding what a smart contract is and how impressive this is. And so she was just telling her different people, her friends from college. All the others, which some of them are my mentees, they bought, $800 worth of Ethereum and made a ton of money. This was when Ethereum was pennies on the dollar.
Right.
He bought $35,000 worth. This is what I'm talking about, taking, calculated risks early.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So by the time he was 29, he retired nearly a millionaire, and he had sold the coin and bought apartment buildings with it. Then he was bored. He's like 29. I mean, what do you do with the rest of your life? And, $1 million is a lot, but it's still, it's a lot by the age of 29. But anyway, so he just said, so he started talking to some people, and they had some ideas, some things they want to work on. One thing leads to the next, and he has created the world's first crypto options analytics software that is subscribed to by all the hedge funds. And and so I think now he's 33 or 34, and that company was just acquired.
Wow.
So so anyway, so it's just this guy was, he knew, but his passion was risk. So it's understanding your passion, but not being like, my passion is going to the gym. And then, having it be that limiting. So you need to have it be broad enough, the way you describe your passion, to have something that you could do for a career fit into that.
Wow. Oh, I love that. And he ended up doing what he loved to do, which was options. So how cool is that? And did it in crypto. That's really, really cool. All right. So, there's people listening, right? And they're like, oh, it's too late for me. Oh, I missed that, So yes, there's that conversation out there, right? So when is it too late to make that $100 million?
I think I would love to say it's never too late.
Right.
but I think in your 60s, it's too late. You
Gotcha.
can, when you're in your 50s, you still can have 20 or 30 years to compound.
Right.
But when you're in your 60s, so even if we think about a really famous Kentucky Fried Chicken, right?
Mhm.
Colonel Sanders, and he came up with that recipe, but he came up with that recipe in his early 40s. But he only sold his first franchise at the age of 62. So he's really looked at as like, look, it's never too late. It's never too late, which is great that he did that. But when he died with $3 million, which is, I mean, it's great. It's a lot of money, but it's not 100 million. And that's an
Right.
example of a big success story starting at 62. It's just not enough time to compound. And if you're ever wondering, like, well, how much, how much of a rate would I need to compound about? So I have $100 million calculator on my website, and you can enter, well, what if I entered, 5 and I 5 million and I compound it 15%, how much would I have in 30 years? So you can just put those 3 things in and it'll show you how much money you'll end up with.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. One of my favorite things to work with our students on is that, you take the penny and you double it every day. We use 30 days, but say it's 30 years, right? But you're taking it and you're doubling it every day. And I always ask the students, okay, so if you did that and you took 1 penny and you doubled it, 2 pennies, 4 pennies, 8 pennies, 16, and so on, right? At the end of 30 days, how much money will you have? And no one ever, unless they've seen it before, they get close, right? But if they've never seen it, it's always funny. They're like, $100,000, $1 million, $2 million. It's like, no, this is like in 30 days, taking a penny that doubles every day, over $10 million. And it's like, and it's like, it's just amazing when you look at compounding. And it's great because you're really pointing to, when you look at, is there a time, like, when is it too late? So, like in the 60s, yeah, well, our listeners, they're not anywhere near that, right? And so the time to start is now, no matter what that looks like, and just getting started. And that's the first step, is getting started and then being willing to go forward. And maybe the next step is to read your book, right? So people can find you, by going to your website, which is Emmy Sobieski.com. And we're going to have that in the show notes for people, that they'll be able to see that. And then they also can get there by just by putting in, you also have the site 100mil.careers, and that'll take you right to your website as well. And the book's available on Amazon. So 100mil is 100mil.careers, and that'll take you right to Emmy's site as well. And Emmy, I think you were going to say something. I think I interrupted you, so I'm so sorry about that. But I wanted people, because I know people are like, oh my gosh, well, okay, so how do I get all the great information, right? Anything else you want to share with people? We'll have all the show notes up there so people can, figure out how to get to your site, how to get in touch with you, how to find the book. What would be some parting thoughts for our listeners here?
Yeah. So what I found, this really requires, if you say I want $100 million career, it requires working 80-hour weeks, sometimes 100-hour weeks for decades. It requires a lot of work. And so what I say is, my book is not for everyone. My book is not for somebody that wants to work 30, 40-hour weeks and have balance. And there's absolutely, I mean, that's wonderful. We need all kinds of different people and all kinds of different motivations. We don't just need a whole bunch of robots that only want 100 million and want to work all the time, right? We want a vibrant, differentiated society. And so what I have found is that even the people interested in that kind of more of a balanced lifestyle, there's some great stories in my book, and maybe their kids want that 100 million. Maybe their kids are willing to do that work. They have a kid that's really hardworking that they wish that they could give guidance to, or they wish they knew someone on Wall Street that would mentor them. So I've found that it's like, but it's not for everyone, but there's so many stories in there that if you're ever curious about what those worlds are like in board directors and Wall Street and venture capital, there's lots of just being real and firsthand stories.
That's so great. Hey, it's funny, you gave me this thought that even, for the ones that are not in that 68-hour work weeks, right? I've been in that world. So, but, getting in you're talking about break in, right? What if it was that you were breaking in where your equity became from finding people who were willing to do that? And maybe you didn't want to do that, but maybe that's part of your equity. Your equity road is like, well, you know what? I'm going to go find those people that want to do that. I want to be a part of what they're doing. And so it's just interesting. It's kind of like there's so many different ways to play the game. So that's
So
awesome.
many, so
Yeah, that's
many.
so great.
Absolutely.
Well,
Absolutely.
Emmy, this has been just a delight, and so I'm so excited people can, get to your site and find out more about you. Oh, and I know, I know you've written a lot of blogs. Are your
Yes.
blogs connected to your website as well?
It is. And then what I
Right,
do, I don't like all those funky tricks that people play in terms of like the newsletter and all,
right.
and trapping people into things. And so I have a newsletter that normally goes out once a week where I talk about markets. I don't dumb anything down. So it has a crazy 80% open rate. But if you miss the newsletter or you want to go back, you don't want to have to save all the newsletters in your email. Every single newsletter becomes a blog.
Oh, great.
So sometimes not every, there may be more blogs than there are newsletter articles, but you never have to go back through the newsletter and have some hassle thing. Everything becomes a blog. And then if you ever need to reach me, you can reach me on Twitter or LinkedIn. I'm the easiest to reach on LinkedIn. So I respond to my DMs and really enjoying people read the book and then tell me, ask me a question about it, or it's just wonderful to be able to use the internet these days and have one-on-one conversations with my readers.
Oh, that's so great. Absolutely. Like we're doing now. So it's perfect. Well, Emmy, again, thanks for making your day work to be here. And I know this has just been so much information, which is so great for people. And then, they're just, people stepping into this. This is like step one. And here we go. This is your breaking in so that you can get into that 3-step process. Emmy, thanks again for being here. And everyone listening, thanks again for tuning into A+ Parents. And we'll see you all next time. Thanks, everyone. And thank you, Emmy.
Thanks for having me, Dennis. It was fantastic.
Awesome. Thank you.